This is Valar and the Maiar, the Immortal Powers. This is for Middle-earth, the Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth role-playing game system produced by Iron Crown Enterprises back in the day. This actually would be a follow-up installment of an earlier version, which they did a 3-part series, and I have already reviewed a number of those, I think, where they break down the Immortals and the other races, and then the humans in 3 different installments. Those were for this would be 2nd edition. Those were for 1st edition, and a remake, which for the most part is quite identical. There's not a lot of change. One of the reasons, obviously, I opened up with the borrowed entry that I did, that in the movies there's very few mention of the Valar and the Maiar specifically. There's hints in play. In Tolkien's deeper works, there's a lot of information, especially the Silmarillion and some of his unpublished works, and that were published by his son Christopher, or observations that Christopher and others made in other publishings based off of Tolkien's notes and letters and things of the day. One of the things that sets our fantasy role-playing games apart from steampunk, cyberpunk, sci-fi versions, modern-day versions, post-apocalyptic versions of role-playing games is the depth of backstory and information that's available. One of the things I think the earlier creators for Dungeons & Dragons, which as much people like to pretend like it didn't happen, the lion's share of our predecessors since then, game systems that came and were the people who created those game systems, cut their teeth playing older game systems. Whether it was MERP or Dungeons & Dragons or Rollmaster, which basically is what this is sitting on top of, and other games of its type. They benefited from the creative works of literary masters such as J.R.R. Tolkien, and he's not by means the only one. There's a number of others that I know of, but are kind of drawing a blank at the moment. Tolkien went to great lengths to have as much information in his back story as possible, and a lot of it he never really intended for it to be published. His reasoning was, if it's just like his work on languages, when he wanted to have a language for a specific race, whether it was humans or elves or whatever. He wanted to know why a word was formed and what it meant and why it meant what it did as much as possible. And part of that has to do with his academic pursuits of being a master, of verbiage and things of this nature, along with other historical interests. So he just couldn't help himself. And some say, well, why did he didn't have to have every backstory of every freaking tree, everything. But in his mind, he did. The more he knew about where these characters came from and the world that they operated in, the better the story was. And I tend to agree. Now, as a game master, and I know some of you have done the same, whether you acknowledge it or not, or you have played with those who have. Some of us, we became obsessed at some point in our game career. A lot of it was when we were younger, of world building. It wasn't enough to just have a game module or a source book or two to work from. We wanted to have a richer world, and in some cases we wanted our own. Greyhawk was not sufficient. Faerun was not sufficient, or didn't exist at the time when I started doing my world building. And the more information I had in the back, sometimes too much information, and we had to learn how to mediate it, what's important for our notes, just for us to know, and what we needed to apply for our players to be able to function without overloading them. And in some aspects we learned that from things like this, not this particular book, but the methodology behind it, in my opinion. Okay, that's just my 2 cents on that. The reason I also picked the Black Riders, the Nazgul, is because in this particular, they are immortal, and as long as the One Ring exists, and so on and so forth, so they also play a fairly significant role in this particular book and its predecessor, We have quite a bit of information on them and other people of the bad guys, so to speak. And it's just astounds me of how many of these people have played roles. I mean, they cut out some parts in Jackson's movies because they just simply the movies were long enough as it was, and there was so much that they couldn't include. And I understand that the remastered versions that have added some of those pieces, the meeting with Tom Bombadil and his spouse as an example of that. The Valar and the Maiar, well, we are familiar with Saruman and Sauron and Gandalf and the Balrog. Well, these are all Maiar. The Valar are godlike beings that are not, depending on who you ask. The elves worship them and admire them, some more than others, but they attribute them to beings of great power. And the ancient history of the western Middle Earth that's no longer there. Numur is no longer there. The Valar had intermingled and talked and walked and met with some of the heroes of those ages, and now they content themselves to remain in Amun beyond the Bent Sea and the immortal realms, and no intentions of coming back to Middle Earth, blah blah. And they sent the Maiar, they sent the wizards to help combat the existing Maiar that were still there, i.e. Sauron, Balrog, and things like that. So when we look at this book, there's the sheer amount of information that is applicable. This would be the Deities and Demigod book for Middle Earth, in all intents and purposes, if you want to make the comparison. So a lot of what you're going to have in here is not really intended for play in the game, unless you run a very, I don't want to just say you really got yourself into something that you really want to do, because it would take a lot of effort. But we talk about Ainur's history in here, the origins of the two lamps and the founding of Amun, the two trees, basically the history of Middle Earth and the world in general, how the elves came to be, how they got to Orm's embassy and the claim of Morgoth, the great journey of the elves, etc., etc. All this is stuff that's just a recap of things that you'll find in the appendices of Lord of the Rings and in the Silmarillion and in other works like the unspoken or the unpublished works and was it Unnamed Tales or whatever. And for backstory information, really deep backstory, it makes for some really good reads. Maybe the occasional hint if you're going to toss it in there to your campaign, but for the most part this is not your traditional campaign module for dealing with majority of what's in here. Your player characters should never be in a condition and never advance to a degree where they were interacting. It was the similar conundrum when you're dealing with Dungeons and Dragons and other game systems of similar nature. Give it a thought for a minute. We're talking deities and demigods, 400, 500 level beings that can pull on pretty much every spell ever created and then some, and then are all but indestructible. This is, in this case, look at Gandalf. Gandalf came into being, spent several thousand years wandering around Middle Earth, trying to help guide the good forces in the fight against the bad forces, the evil forces. And there you go, Frankie, you get in the window. And then has a confrontation with a Balrog, which is being a Maiar of fire, very compatible to him, but he was able to overcome him, and at the cost of his physical form, i.e., quote, physically died, and then went back to the Undying Lands and was just judged and decided that his mission was not finished and was returned to his corporal form and reborn or regenerated as Gandalf the White with not new power. That's sometimes a misconception with people who are not deeply entrenched in the lore. of Lord of the Rings. Gandalf just remembered, and he says it right there in the movies and the books. He walked past long forgotten, and he remembered much that he had forgotten. In his guise as an old man or a wizened individual, i.e., a wizard, he was. I don't want to say he was purposely veiled, but a lot of his past memories were removed from his access, if you will, on purpose to make it so he was more functional. And he remembered much of what he didn't have before, including some of his magical powers and things like that. And so it's anybody in here pretty much is immortal. They talk about the death of like Sauron. Sauron dissipated, not unlike you look at the Harry Potter series, and oh boy, puts too much of himself into different Horcruxes, and as the Horcruxes are destroyed, Voldemort decreases, and it reaches a point where the last and final one technically is Harry, and Harry is dies and then comes back, and that's what did in Voldemort at the end of the day. So when we're looking at Sauron, Sauron's power diminishes over time. He's unable to take, he's killed at the fall of Nurmor and then reconstitutes. He takes a long time to do that, but he uses the ring as his focus, even though he doesn't have possession of it, reconstitutes his physical form, and though it is portrayed in the movies as the Eye of Fire, that is actually not canon. If you really want to go that route, he actually has a physical form. It's just pretty hideous. Gollum even makes mention of it, that the one of the 9 fingers, and 9 is enough, and that means he wasn't put in front of the all-seeing flaming eye. The Sauron has a physical being, and his eye is his magical construct in order to view things from a distance, but it's just utilized by Peter Jackson that way. And so when he's finally destroyed, the ring's destroyed, he loses focus and he's banished beyond the void, or he slips off behind into the depths where Morgoth is gone, or he becomes so diminished he's just ineffectual. He's just a bad memory for eternity. And the same way things could be said. So when the Balrog perished, the Balrog went back to the halls of Mandos and was judged unworthy, I'm sure, of being able to stay in the Undying Lands and return to his former status as a fire mayor and so on and so forth, and was banished and diminished, and all the others like him. So that's the kind of a short, ugly version of what goes on there, and a lot of that has absolutely no bearing in a tabletop game unless you're using it for lore, in my opinion. So we don't have a whole lot of information, visually speaking, in the movies on the Valar and the Maiar, which is why when I tried looking them up, I ended up with the Nazgul as being the most effective. I don't want to call it pirating, but I'm borrowing some of these clips, obviously, and they have claims on them and different things. So if you look at it from a perspective of trying to find something visual to fluff up my channel just a hair, I got to work with what I got to work with, and by definition the Nazgul do apply, although I would call them second tier or third tier immortals, i.e. that they were human beings at one point, and not even, you couldn't even tie them to the Elvish bloodlines, although some of the Black Nermians might have some claim there, but their race and their power was dependent on Sauron still existing. So once he dissipated, they dissipated, and that was that. So technically, really, they don't belong in here, but they do fit in, because for all intents and purposes they're immortal until they're not. Orange juice is my drink of the morning today. I was never a big fan of this stuff for years, and I don't know, as I've gotten older, I've been a little more conscious about finding natural and organic things to help my health, and especially since I don't have the ability to pay for insurance right now, and the company I work for does not have insurance. And it'll be a few more years yet before my finances get to the point where I can. So I have to do everything I can to take care of myself. And a couple glasses of orange juice a day, that extra vitamin C is a good thing to have. So is turmeric, apparently. I'm trying to put some of that, tablespoons of honey instead of sugar, things like that. Trying to improve what I can, where I can. Valor and religion. Valid descriptions, the specifics, Aule, and a bunch of most have not been mentioned. Armo, Manwe, the head of the Pantheon, if you will. And we're not going to go name by name, individual by individual, because that would just take forever. And Maya subgroups, I was talking about the Maya powers, the elemental Maiar, i.e. light, air, fire, water. Arwen and the Balrogs were the most famous, the fire spirits. Unin, the river woman, and Goldberry were best known, the water spirits, etc. Tom Bombadil was an earth spirit tied to the heart of Middle Earth, etc., etc. I gotta take a pause for a second here, folks. Alright, resume. Like I said, they break it down. The Valar Maiar. The Themeric Maiar, i.e. Maiar like Sauron and Saruman, represent crafts, often focus on the development of inanimate objects. Incarnation asserts the Smith Aule are intertwined with a relationship between material objects and living. Those serving Earl's life, Ivana, tend to Uller or Flora, living earth like Radagast. Other Maiar are associated with similarly general themes colored by their fealty. Rome's vassal, particularly Tilion, examined their master's essence and concerned himself with the relationship between Uru's children and other Kelvar, living things that move. Their concerns, yes, Frankie? What? Yeah? Yeah? What? You getting some attention? Is that what it is? Yeah? Yeah? You just want some attention. And the Istari, with the change of the world, the Maiar became further removed from the life in Endor, traveled between Middle Earth and Amun, all but halted, except for those elves who longed for the light of the land's undying. Nevertheless, the Valar and the Maiar servants remained protectors of the balance of things. The rise of Sauron at Third Age, darkness once again threatens to enslave all of Middle Earth. Manwe chose an indirect means to combat the threat. Selected trust. Now, that's something to think about for a second. We're back to the deep level of stuff for Middle Earth and wondering why. Why did Manwe, the head of the Pantheon, decide to not send directly intervene? Why did the Valar themselves not return to Middle Earth to combat Sauron directly and to get rid of the bad guys? Well, there's Frankie for you. No, Frankie, don't step on the computer. Yeah. Right there, huh, Frankie? Right here in your weird googly eye? Yeah. Why don't you get down here? Look what, historically speaking, happened when the Valar set foot in Middle Earth to confront Morgoth, Sauron, boss. Big chunks of the Beleriand was destroyed. It sank beneath the ocean. Amun itself was removed from the direct surface of Arda, and by a mystical, magical means of the direct route, you can no longer sail from the shores of Middle Earth to Amun directly because it was removed, i.e. it was either moved to a different realm, a different, moved into orbit, however you want to look at it, a different dimension, but it was permanently detached from Arda. So the Vala realized that, Manwe realized that if he sent the Vala in any form back to Middle Earth, a very catastrophic destruction tends to follow at the end of the day. They could obviously overcome Sauron. He was never as potent as Morgoth. He as powerful as he got. He never was that powerful. But it was the wisdom of not repeating. In the Christian dogma, God destroyed the world with a flood. He told Noah he wouldn't do it again. He didn't destroy the world with fire and earth. Each time was something different. The next time the Earth gets destroyed, it'll either come from an asteroid or an outside force, or from our own human frailties, because God doesn't want to intervene directly like that again. You want to destroy yourselves, you're going to destroy yourselves. It's not going to be I'm not going to sit here to help hold your hand. So in that aspect, Manwë sends the Astari. They sends 5 emissaries to the wizards and gives them a task. And of the 5, only Gandalf holds true to the end. And indirectly, it is through his, let's call it manipulations and or clever uses of turns of a phrase and shepherding the human race to do the right thing to defeat the bad guys, and with help from the elves, or what's left of the elves, who then at that point begin to depart Arda in earnest. They leave Middle-earth forever because things have changed and it's no longer a viable place for them to remain. They will diminish. Galadriel says that, I will go in the west or I will diminish, will become a very, a mythological folk in the long run. Humanity is going to dominate the world for here on out, and that's the way it's supposed to be, and that may have been the plan all along. Great Uru, the great god, the creation, for the creation mythology for Middle-earth, may have had that in plan all along and just didn't bother telling nobody. So we got some breakdowns of various Maiar. These are a few of them gets mentioned. Arwen, Ainur, Golberry, you hear them pop up in the books and occasionally in the movie. Some of the Balrogs, Luthien. Some are more revered by the elves than others. Some are revered by various human races, but are called by different names. Here we got Sauron, and he has an entry in section 6. Tilion, the Moon's Guide. Tom Bombadil, very interesting and odd character. This. And we got the Astari, the chapter on the Astari, the Istar mission, the 5 emissaries. As I said, only one of the 5 remained true to his quest. 4 of the wise became tied to Endor through their adopted bodies, eventually falling prey to their emotions and sliding away from their appointed mission. Wizard's roots, the goals of the Wizard's embassy, notes of using the Astari in your fantasy game, the guises of the emissaries. Once again, there are many of you out there, many of my associates and friends, who would be much better suited at giving you a historical narrative about this, that, and the other thing. I can only give you my insight and my view, personal view. And of course, there we go. Frankie back here in the background, right there. Over there. Yeah, there. Yeah, right. Anyway. Back in the day, when Gary Gygax and others were creating game systems, and I found it interesting that there's never been one true solid. A lot of people attribute Gary Gygax as being the first, and it's not true, because historically speaking, there's a number of game systems that equate to his earliest works or predate them a little bit. So he got a taste of it from somebody else, and there must have been at some point, someplace, a group of people or an individual who thought, I want to create a game that's more than a tabletop game. There's a lot of talk about the de-evolution or the evolution of tabletop war games, where people play tabletop war games would invest in specific heroes or commanders or something like this, and develop more information about them for their own personal interests or just for fun, and from that evolved the tabletop role gaming, and there's quite a bit of truth to that, but I think there's probably a little more subtle stuff going on back in there than what we considered. So at the very earliest days, when they were looking at things like the wizard, the magician class, we have Gandalf as a big number 1, or number 2, and Merlin as the 2. Now there are others in mythology and history, in our own history, that we claimed were wizards of some sort, mythology or their version of fantasy. from hundreds of years ago or 1,000 years ago. And there were also, but the two key ones that pop in my mind would be Gandalf and Merlin. And Gandalf is Saruman and Ragast, and the other Istari from Lord of the Rings, because it's just the iconic idea of what mythology thinks a wizard, a wise man, would be, in my opinion. As always, your own opinion, always welcome to your own opinions, do your own videos, and or comment. Leave comments below, tell me I'm right, tell me I'm wrong, tell me how you think it could be otherwise. Flip me off. Anytime you click something down there, it's good for me, right? So, introducing the Istari in the game from Middle Earth. That was another thing about Middle Earth in general. Tolkien played down magic. It wasn't as flamboyant and expressive as it would be in Dungeons and Dragons and in some mythology. It's far more subtle. We don't see the wizards going around on a regular basis. The only time we ever see a lot of it is when they confront each other, or in the case of confronting another being of power, such as another mayor like the Balrog. For the most part, Gandalf uses his wits and his intelligence, his knowledge, and his ability to negotiate and communicate to achieve the goals that need to be achieved by utilizing other people. His actual direct input of magic is very limited. You can see that in the movie too. He uses one or two brief instances there in Goblin Town, one or two brief instances in Moria, and he lights up the caverns, for example. Subtle magic that doesn't put out a lot of, you don't see him flinging lightning bolts and fireballs around. We don't even know if he's capable of that kind of magic, though it's implied because we want it to be there. We like the idea of that sort of thing. And so Gandalf, more of the detail, and Gandalf the White, Gandalf the Grey, stats for the other wizards, if you wanted to include them in a game, as whatever reasons, Saruman, all of his abilities and powers and capabilities. Then we get the fallen Ainur, Morgoth, the only Valar that fell, and his nature quite a bit, which in truth, other than mythology, the odds are really slim. We're not going to, 1,500 hit points. Melee offensive bonus is 666. His missile bonus is 660. If you divide that, you go by a D20 system, and we're talking a guy that's got a plus 67 to hit. Buck 67 to hit with a missile. He's level 500. I mean, these are literal gods and deities and demigods that come out of the equivalent of the book. You should not encounter these things one-on-one as a player, ever. Not even briefly, because it should break you. And then Sauron has a long, speckled history. Lots of information about this guy, and that's partly for lore. Utilize bits and pieces of this in your game. The Balrog of Moria. You're a fool if you want to go up against this fellow and some of them other Balrogs of history. All right. And information in there. Technically, like I said, the section for the Nazgul would be, I think it would be in another installment, and I don't remember if they put out a second book of this or not. At the time Merp was starting to wind down, the ICE was having financial issues or something. I don't recall the details, and there are others who can give you much more information on it. It doesn't matter enough to me to want to go up and do a lot of research on that subject. I just know that they were putting out second edition things, and I don't know if they were getting ready to lose the licensing deal or if they got bought up, but I know that the third edition that was produced by another company under license, and so we've seen a transition from first edition to second edition, and second edition ran for a while, a year or two I think, and then started to phase out, and this is getting into those areas where if fewer books are being produced. They're much more nicer, extensive books. I got several we will review at some point. We shall see. All right. I've also noticed that recently, and this is on me, that at some point last year, I was in the middle of reviewing MERP, or getting into the end of MERP, and I discovered this ability to do this functional down view kind of angle, and or cobbled it together. My rig here is pretty simple. I've done a video on it. It's just a clamp over here. This is a selfie stick where I've got a fairly cheap video cam sitting up there that runs down the cord. You can see it plugs into the laptop over there. I got this, plug it in over there to enhance the audio to some degree. I'm not a fan of these. Frankly, I would not. If I had the Weatherall, I would get me a microphone, because I don't like wearing these things, and frankly, I don't like the way it looks. Right? I don't feel comfortable with it, and I can't quite hear what's going on in the background, because sometimes I need to know if somebody's going to get cranky or something. I never know for sure. My beautiful wife, and her epilepsy messes with her head sometimes, and her mood swings can be pretty strong. Right now she's in a good mood, and more or less, and I'm not having any issues. Frankie's leaning behind me here somewhere, behaving herself. It's all good. So, like I said, I have a number of MERPs already done in a down view, and I realized this the other day when I was previewing. Somebody made a comment on another video I did some time back, and I realized it had a down view, and so the odds are I'm repeating some of these that, excuse me, I don't care how much sleep I get, I'm always tired, that I'm going to continue until I read through the entire MERP system a second go around, mostly because I've done a few things different. I'm trying to improve a few things. Hopefully some of that's showing through in the videos. You know, I don't have a whole lot of subscribers, and I don't expect to ever have a huge amount. I do get quite a few, video hits. I think at some point I've seen over 7,000 video hits. I got one video that's huge, but it's because it's stupid and it has nothing to do with any of this. I think I mentioned that the other day in a different video. Generally speaking, I do 2 videos a week. In this case, because I'm catching up in redoing MERP, because there were some that didn't get the down view version, and because Star Wars is my latest motion. I don't know if I will do, when Star Wars is complete, I still have my Shadowrun collection, what there is of it. I have Battletech and MechWarrior, which I have quite a bit of. Really liked. That's another FASA product, and I really liked it. I really liked the story behind it, and I didn't get to play it a whole lot. I did as a tabletop war game, the MechWarrior, or as Battletech itself is the tabletop, but MechWarrior is a role-playing game, not so much. It has its own challenges of trying to play the two together. Star Wars tries to do that, and they do a little better job of it. They have a supplement called Star Warriors, which is a tabletop starfighter game where you play, you role play out, or not role play, but tactically fight your starfighter battles and battles between small ships and things like that on the board, as opposed to role playing it out. And you can just as successfully role play it out as well. When we're talking Battletech and MechWarrior, there's a little bit more of a challenge between trying to role play Battletech in large scale. Now, if it's a small scale unit thing, then that's a little different. But the world behind it is very rich, very story heavy, and very interlocked, which I really enjoy. FAST has gotten really good at that. MERP is also very good at that, and it saddens me that there's different versions. Like you got a couple different versions of Middle Earth role-playing game now from different companies, but they don't have the same flavor or interconnectivity, it seems, from what I've seen of them. And like I said back in the day, and I say it again and again, if you weren't happy with the D100 system, if you found the old Middle-earth rules clunky or chunky or not successfully, they don't do enough, and I acknowledge this myself, that if you have players that are magic heavy, they like playing magic users, they like having them in their groups, they like to have a lot of magic in their world, and it be visibly flashy. MERP's system's not really geared for that. It does have it, but it's just not, it's more clumsy than Dungeons and Dragons versions of various versions. And as a choice, I've always just borrowed the D&D rule books and superimposed the Middle-earth world on top of the rules, and just went that route. And MERP lends itself to that because it has conversion charts at the beginning of just about every module and every source book that needs them. This is not in one of these because that's not what this kind of book's about. This is a backstory book, or a world book, if you will. Yeah, just my 2 cents on it, and probably been going off target. So there you go, Valar and the Mayor.